You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Hello, and welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I'm Sherry Lipp, Marketing Manager at Stimulus Technologies, and I'm here with Nathan Whittacre, the CEO of Stimulus Technologies. Today, we are going to be talking about the CEO's role in cybersecurity. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everybody to the podcast today.
So Nathan can give us a unique perspective in being both a CEO and a provider of cybersecurity as a service. So to get started, can we talk a little bit about the current cybersecurity landscape and the role of the CEO in that?
Sure. So, you probably read in the news periodically. You've heard on this podcast a number of times. Especially if you're a small to mid-sized business owner, there is significant threats to your organization for cyber attacks. And this comes from both external and internal on the organization. Attacks such as bank fraud, an employee accidentally wiring money to a hacker. It can come from ransomware, where all your files are encrypted and you have to pay a ransom to get it back. It comes from business email compromise, which leads to these other attacks. It could come from, a number of different things. I mean, there's so many ways and so many threats to organizations today that are constantly changing and constantly evolving. And the problem is, as small businesses, we are more worried on a day-to-day standpoint about producing our product or service that we offer, ensuring that our customers are taken care of, dealing with competition or government regulations or tax filings. There's just so many competing things that are in our minds as business owners that one more thing is just sometimes too much. And unless it's like yelling at us that day, we often put it in the back burner. The problem is if we put this issue in the back burner for too long and don't do something about it, there's the repercussions of not taking action are much worse than even some of these other things. A cyber attack or a wire fraud or something like that could be far more devastating than a new competitor moving into your market. So I get it as a CEO. I mean, I'm inundated all day long. Everybody, wants something from me, or, it's important for me to be involved in growing the business and all aspects of the business. But even as a technology CEO, this is something that I have to focus on inside my company and then also focus on it for my clients. So, I do have this unique perspective, of operating a business and trying to protect our clients at the same time. And it is a daunting task. And it's something that I know it keeps me and our team up at night, often thinking about, all these different ways that these cyber criminals are trying to, take down our business or, make profit off of our business in ways that we don't want to involve them.
And with juggling all these things, how does a CEO prioritize? Make cybersecurity a priority?
I don't think it's something that you have to deal with every day, but it's something that should be a periodic discussion with your technology professionals. You as the CEO are most likely not going to implement these security measures inside your company. You do need to be part of the design and the business processes of what that means to your company, but it's not going to be you that's implementing them. I mean, in all seriousness, unless you're a couple of man shop and that's what you got to do. But I highly recommend relying on experts to assist you in this. I mean, this is something that Stimulus Technologies does for our clients. If you have your own vendor on the technology landscape, talk to them, see if they offer managed security services, but it isn't generally your IT person. The IT and cybersecurity are different skill levels, skill packages for the provider. So it's the same thing, you wouldn't ask the person that's changing out the engine in your car to paint the car. It's a different skills level, even though you're working on similar technology. Um, work with your provider. I would say having a quarterly discussion with who's ever handling inside your organization the technology or dealing with an expert. I'd also, recommend having a discussion with your insurance providers because they're a key part of this. At least annually as you're doing your insurance review to make sure that you have the coverages available. But a quarterly discussion with your technology team, and that should include your IT provider, your security provider, should be in that discussion. See where you're at as an organization. And then maybe a little bit more detailed discussion annually to see if there's anything that you need to do inside your organization from an annual perspective, any changes you need to make and implement through the next year. I just did a workshop this last week, and I offer these workshops now to organizations. And we talk about the shift in the mindset of the culture inside the organization to be a secure and innovative culture. And that's really the job of CEOs, is to set the vision and the direction for the organization. So as CEOs, we're not necessarily implementing things, but we're setting the vision and direction. So it's important that if you're listening today is learning what you need to do to implement the security, and then contract or work with experts that can help you implement those things.
And I imagine, the approach might be different depending on the size of the business. If you're going to hire like an internal, you might have, a chief technology officer or a chief cybersecurity officer. Or you might be outsourcing. So how much do you think a CEO, but the bottom line is going to come down to them if there's a problem. So how involved should they be in the decision-making process?
Again, I think it's important for the CEO to have an idea of the information of what's out there. So, you're not as a CEO going to know all the details. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, unless you're a very small organization, you're not filing your own tax return. You're not, maybe doing all your insurance paperwork. You're not, doing everything inside the organization. You're relying on experts to help you with that. So, but you have to know enough about taxes. You have to know enough about, renting a building, enough about legal, reading contracts to at least make well-informed decisions. And so, you're listening to this podcast. And so that's a good start to understand what those decisions are, what need to be made. So, implementing, as we've talked about in here, security measures inside your organization to protect against, those bank frauds, email compromise by implementing multi-factor authentication on your network. So should know what multi-factor authentication is, maybe not how to implement it, but, know that you need that as an organization. Know that you need, the right insurance protection, your cyber liability coverage, your employee theft, your errors and omissions, professional services, insurance, those type of things, and what those insurance companies require to get that insurance. And it might be, implementing MFA is a basic requirement and might be implementing that next generation antivirus. It might, depending on the size of your organization, implementing a security operations center to monitor all your systems. So really, I think starting with, where you're at and implementing a little bit along the way, but work with those experts and take their recommendations and do a little implementation at a time to improve the security inside your organization and create this mindset around, continuous improvement and development of a strong technology culture inside your organization is essential.
And how do you think, as a CEO, we've talked about it a lot, that cybersecurity isn't just set it and forget it, and it's not just one person. How does a CEO kind of foster that culture of cybersecurity with their team?
I think, again, going back to the constant discussion, it should be on the agenda, in my opinion. Of course, this is coming from a technology person, but it should be on the agenda at least quarterly. in your reviews. Inside our organization, for example, we use EOS, which we've talked about on this podcast. And that EOS, that's a cadence of business planning quarterly. If you do it annually, then to have this discussion annually. What if you're a sole entrepreneur, and maybe if you do your own business planning annually, you sit down and just add it as an agenda item. And that's really the start of setting this culture, is just awareness, and making sure that it's a part of the general agenda of the company. If you're setting budgets, that's the finance side. If you're setting operational efficiency, that's the ops side. If you're then technology, cybersecurity should be part of that. In larger organizations, I think you mentioned this before, Sherry, a minute ago, larger organizations have a chief technology officer, they have a chief information officer, and they have a chief security officer. Usually there's 3 people on the C-suite that oversee those parts of the business. And small organizations can't necessarily hire a VCTO or a CTO, CIO, and CSO. And so we had a V at the beginning. I messed that up when I said that, because it's relying on these experts that are virtual chief security officer or virtual chief information officer that can assist you in making these decisions. So, at Stimulus, we have quarterly business reviews, quarterly business technology reviews with our clients. And in those, we discuss the ongoing projects, the business things, business goals that they have inside the organization, and how we as a technology provider can help them implement that, whether it's new software packages, migration to the cloud, whatever it may be. That's the chief technology officer hat, or virtual CIO, virtual CTO. But there's also a discussion we can have as a program of a virtual chief security officer that we could discuss with the CEO, with the leadership team of the organization, security mechanisms that they should be putting in place, whether that's an annual security assessment, security posture assessment. Maybe it's an organization that you need to have an ongoing assessment that's reviewing your systems constantly. And so having that discussion with us, then you can implement those things down the road. So that's something that we offer as a company at Stimulus. If you don't have that in place, we'd be happy to have that discussion with you.
And how do you approach, or how would you advise somebody to approach determining their budget for security, and I guess it would kind of their needs and their budget?
That's a tough one, because I find a lot of small businesses, one, don't budget very well to begin with. So that's putting a budget together and a line item for technology, and then for security, I think, is a start also. Just kind of a rough range, basic security mechanisms in place inside an organization should be budgeted somewhere between $15 and $25 per user per month. More advanced cybersecurity costs upwards of $50 to $75 per user per month. And that's, tools and management and everything that's on there. So, just give you a rough idea of what those, security technologies cost. You can just multiply that rough number that I just gave you per user, and that should be about what you're spending on security, whether you're implementing it in-house with your own tools or using an outside vendor. That's what we're seeing in the marketplace. Big enterprises might be spending over $100 per user per month for their security systems, and that adds up pretty quick. But that's adding labor, internal tools from an external security operations center, and depending on the compliance needs, also the organization, the cost could go up. So compliance plays a part of this too. If you're an organization that has a high regulatory burden, maybe you're a defense contractor, or you have HIPAA, or you're under the FTC safeguards rule, your costs may go up also because you need outside audits as part of it. But that's a rough budget, and somewhere between 15 to $50 per user is kind of a rough number we'd use.
And have you found, and when we do assessments, that there are expenses and that people weren't expecting, upgrades or needs that they weren't expecting?
When we go into a potential client, a prospect, we often find the security is very neglected. And that's why they're contacting us. They might have had a ransomware event or some type of other security event that happened, and their IT provider dropped the ball. And honestly, it's wasn't because the IT provider dropped the ball. It's because the IT provider wasn't providing security. They weren't a managed security provider. And so what we often find is updates not being ran on systems properly. Their Windows versions are old. They might have old equipment. Their firewalls aren't up to date. They might not have antivirus or next generation antivirus on all their systems. And so we find all these little holes along the way. There's best practices that we recommend. We usually bring in a third-party assessment company that reviews the work that we're doing and provides us a recommendation from another third party. And that helps us to say, this is not what we recommend, but this is what this security expert recommends that you implement inside your system. And this is how we can help you. But we often find, like I said, just, little things here and there. And it's really easy, just looking at the chain of events that occurs that, produces a wire fraud or a ransomware attack. It's usually one email account that didn't have MFA turned on. A hacker gets into that account, monitors it for 2 to 6 months, and sees what the email traffics are going that's going on. Maybe impersonates a vendor or impersonates a client, and gets somebody inside the organization to do something they wouldn't necessarily do. It's a social engineering attack. And that's the kind of stuff that happens. It's a long-term play by these hackers, and it's because something wasn't done right inside the organization because nobody was monitoring it. So that's the kind of stuff that we find, and we're just finding that the IT providers aren't staying on top of this stuff as much as they should.
And when it does come to a breach, we've talked a lot about response and what people should do in general. But what role does the CEO have specifically when it comes to a security breach or post breach?
It all falls on their shoulder, just like everything else. That's really what the problem and the good thing about being the CEO. It's often said that it's lonely up top, and it really is, because in the end the responsibility does fall on the captain of the ship, the CEO of the organization. So, you're, as a CEO, responsible for any attestation you sign, for an insurance company or for your credit card, for PCI compliance, things like that. All those things you're guaranteeing as the owner of the company or the CEO of the company that that is true. And when something like a breach happens, your employees, your customers, your vendors are going to be looking at you saying, why didn't you provide the guidance to the organization to make sure that those things happen? I often share a story when I do these webinars about a small business owner a few years ago that was in the news. And it was a small business, call it a few $1,000,000 in annual revenue. So, decent sized small business. And, they had a breach, and part of that breach, they were also investigated by law enforcement for that breach, and all their equipment was taken. And so they were put out of business by law enforcement to help them resolve this breach issue, because they needed to get in there and figure out what occurred. And so, you know, this company lost millions of dollars worth of revenue by being down for months, and then the reputation loss, and eventually put them out of business. And that's not a story that I want to ever share on this podcast about somebody that I know that personally that happened to. I do know people personally that have had, they've been victims of wire fraud that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because an unsuspecting employee wired money outside the organization to what appeared to be a legitimate vendor, but ended up being a hacker. And man, it just thinking about it just makes me upset. I mean, it makes my blood curdle to think that these hackers are getting away with, hundreds of thousands of dollars from, people that I care about. Um, and I just, I want to protect, my friends, my clients, the people that I work with. I can't scream enough to say this is stuff that we have to do as CEOs to protect our long time investment. I've been in business for, 28 years now. I'm sure you've been in business for a very long time, whether it's a year or 50 years, it's a long time to you. And that investment, that time, that energy, you don't want to waste it on a hacker or, a bad employee or an employee that doesn't know what they're doing, making a mistake that costs you your business. And then it costs your employees their livelihood. It costs your customers, time and energy to switching vendors. It just ruins the marketplace. So that's the last thing I want to have happen to you. And so I implore you to, make sure that you're, protecting your companies. You're setting that vision in place to have that mindset that, you're responsible for securing your company and preventing those risks from happening to your enterprise.
And if you have, let's say, I mean, there's breaches and there's mistakes, but what if you have an employee that's committing a cyber crime on your equipment? If you're not aware and you didn't make yourself aware of what they're doing, are you in trouble too?
That's highly possible. Again, in that case, I would recommend ensuring that you have that employee theft insurance in place, and that you're doing background checks on your employees, if I could say that word right. Ensuring that your employees are doing what they should be doing and have the monitoring systems in place. But you can't be perfect all the time. I mean, we're reaching maybe 95 to 99% on securing organizations, even with all the tools in place. So that you could have that rogue employee that's getting around those things. But if you're doing everything possible to ensure that your organization is safe, you have the right insurance, you have the right security tools, and you're doing everything possible, and you still get the breach, your insurance company is going to help protect you. That they're going to come and pay for that, and they're going to help pay for the mitigation, remediation, all that to ensure that your livelihood stays current. It's just like if you have a fire in your building and you did everything. You had your fire protection systems, you kept up to date on your water and all that, and all your protection systems. Your insurance company is going to come and rebuild your building for you, and that's what this insurance is there in place. But you have to do all those things first for your insurance company to protect you. So it's not impossible for that to still happen, but I think it's less likely for that to happen if you're doing all the right things.
And from a CEO perspective, from your perspective as a CEO, how do you incorporate cybersecurity when you're making decisions about other aspects of your business? And where does cybersecurity play a role? Is it in accounting? Is it in everything?
I'll share a quick example with you right now. We're implementing a couple of new systems inside our organization, trying to streamline our business processes. And one of the vendors, was doing an implementation and requested full access in between two of our systems. And it was a quick thing to do. It was a little button to say, "Oh, allow full access," and it was without the mindset of saying, "Hey, wait, what am I doing to allow this third-party system full access into one of our critical systems in our organization? What implications does that cause?" And that's the kind of question that you should have is, are the things that I'm doing going to cause additional issues down the road? And ensure that your team understands that, if a vendor tells you to do something, don't necessarily do it. Have those questions answered to ensure that your systems are safe and protected. Um, because vendors don't really care about your company as much as you do. I'm sure even your employees, they may really care about your company, but you as the owner care more, and that's or CEO, you care more because that's your baby. That's what you built up. That's what you live for every day. Um, so just having that mindset of, you know, not just doing things by default because somebody tells you to do them, a vendor says it or an employee says to do it, ensuring you're questioning the actions of others, and then again, maybe a little paranoia, but instill that in your team too, to question that and saying, is that the thing that's going to keep me protected down the road? Because there's so many things that can happen, without putting these protections in place. And I think it's as whether you're the CEO doing the implementation or you're overseeing the team and you have a chief operating officer or somebody that's in kind of that role of operations or finance or whatever over those organizations, make sure they're questioning those things and have a little paranoia, especially when vendors are doing things. So just a quick story, that I see that, way too often that, that these changes can cause disruption inside your organization. And it scares me, to as a CEO thinking about what everybody's doing. But we try to have that conversation often to ensure that things are protected and everybody understands that this affects the entire organization and can cause major issues if not taken care of. So and whether it's finance, whether it's operations, whether it's your technology side, they're all interlinked, and a lot of times they're interlinked through technology.
And if one of our clients, is that something they could call us and be like, we have vendors wanting access to these systems? Is that something we would help them, guide them through?
Yeah, certainly. So if you have a vendor, I always recommend this. If a vendor's trying to do something, whether it's as simple as switching out, the modem to your internet service or something as complex as in implementing a new ERP system, contact us first. Have us involved in the process so that we can ask those questions of the vendor. Don't just do it by default. Don't do everything a vendor says. Let us be the bad guys and say no, because we want to ensure that you're protected, and we're happy to answer those conversations and keep you protected. So it's definitely something that we can help you out with.
And what advice do you have for business owners and CEOs to kind of keep up with, what's new out there in threats without it, overtaking their life?
No, that's one of the things that I wrote the book for, the CEO's Digital Survival Guide, is to help CEOs understand the technologies that are out there, not just from the security front, but also things that they can implement inside their company to make them far more productive. Listening to this podcast is a great start. Attending our webinars. There's also plenty of the security channels and things out there that are designed around CEOs. But you got to talk to your experts again. Do those reviews with the experts inside your organization and allow them to guide you through it. But start with the book. I mean, that's what we wrote it for. And if you want some additional training inside your organization, we can assist with that too. And feel free to reach out to me at any time and we can set something up.
All right. Well, and that was going to be my last question was, if somebody wants to do one of your workshops, is that something you do in person, virtual, or both? And how do they start working on that?
So our workshops are usually done in small groups, call it 10 to 15 executives. Is a great environment. We can do it both virtually or in person. So like I said, I just did an in-person workshop last week. So happy to do both. Again, like to have a group of executives that are interested in this and want to learn more. And it's an interactive, about a 3 to 4 hour workshop, depending on the questions, to just give an overview of what technology is inside the organization, answer a lot of questions, dispel those myths or have a better understanding of the acronyms that are thrown out there, and really get down to the core of what you need to be doing inside your organization. So if you have a group of CEOs, if you're a part of a Vistage group or an EO or some other type of peer advisor group, those are the type of organizations that I'm speaking to on a workshop basis. So happy to set something like that up, and feel free to contact us if you're interested in doing that.
All right. Well, thank you, Nathan. Always valuable insights.
Thank you, Sherry, and thanks everybody for listening today.